Another day, another story. Strictly speaking, a serial killer is someone who murders at least two people in separate events that occur at different times. While serial murder is not formalized by any legal code, the crimes of serial killers have often been seized on by the media and the public consciousness, especially in cases where there are many victims or the murders are carried out in gruesome fashion. The following list explores some of the most notorious serial killers the world has ever known. Welcome to Taboo Eminent Channel. Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper is one of the most infamous unidentified serial killers in history. The murderer targeted female prostitutes in the impoverished Whitechapel district of London. The true identity of Jack the Ripper remains unknown. We call him Jack the Ripper, but we don't really know who the person behind one of the older and most notorious murder sprees was. The killer appeared in London's Whitechapel district in 1888 and murdered 5 women, all prostitutes, and mutilated their corpses. Police surmised the killer was a surgeon, butcher, or someone skilled with a scalpel. The killer mocked the community and the police by sending letters outlining the acts. Although many suspects have been named over the years, the killer has never been identified. Jack the Ripper is one of the most infamous and elusive serial killers in history. The name, Jack the Ripper, refers to an unidentified serial killer who terrorized the Whitechapel district of London in 1888. The killer's true identity remains unknown, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Here are some key points about Jack the Ripper. Victims. Jack the Ripper is believed to have been responsible for the murders of at least 5 women, all prostitutes, in the Whitechapel area. The victims were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. The brutality of the murders and the mutilation of the bodies contributed to the notoriety of the case. Modus operandi. The Ripper's modus operandi involved throat slashing, abdominal mutilations, and sometimes the removal of internal organs. The level of precision and knowledge of anatomy displayed in the murders suggested that the perpetrator might have had some medical knowledge. Investigation. The investigation into the Ripper murders was challenging and plagued by limited forensic technology of the time. Despite widespread public and media attention, the police were unable to identify the killer. Numerous suspects were proposed, including local residents, but none were definitively linked to the crimes. Letters and taunts. During the height of the murders, the police received a series of taunting letters and postcards, some of which were signed, Jack the Ripper. The authenticity of these letters has been debated, and their true origin remains uncertain. Legacy. The Jack the Ripper case has left a lasting legacy in popular culture, inspiring numerous books, films, and television shows. The mystery surrounding the killer's identity and the gruesome nature of the crimes continue to captivate the public's imagination. Theories and suspects. Over the years, numerous theories and suspects have been proposed, ranging from local butchers to members of the royal family. However, due to the lack of conclusive evidence and the passage of time, the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains one of the greatest mysteries in criminal history. The case of Jack the Ripper remains an enduring enigma, and various theories and investigations have been conducted over the years in an attempt to uncover the identity of this notorious serial killer. Despite these efforts, the true identity of Jack the Ripper remains one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in the history of crime. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer started killing in 1978, just 18 years old, and wasn't arrested for murder until 1991, after a would-be victim escaped and led police back to Dahmer's Milwaukee, Wisconsin, home. It was there that some of the gruesome details of his life of killing were seen via photos of mutilated bodies and body parts strewn across the apartment. He even had a vat of acid he used to dispose of victims. In all, Dahmer killed 17 people, mostly young men of color. He served time in prison twice, the first time for molestation and the second time for murder, and was killed by a fellow inmate in 1994. Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or the Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer and sex offender who gained notoriety for his heinous crimes. Here are key details about Jeffrey Dahmer. Background. Birth: May 21, 1960. Death: November 28, 1994, murdered in prison. Crimes. Dahmer was convicted of murdering and dismembering 17 young men between 1978 and 1991. His crimes involved acts of necrophilia and cannibalism. Dahmer's victims were primarily young, gay men of Asian or African descent. He targeted vulnerable individuals, often luring them with promises of money or employment. Arrest and trial. Dahmer's crimes were discovered when one of his intended victims, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape and led police to Dahmer's apartment. In 1992, Dahmer was convicted of 16 murders and sentenced to 16 life terms in prison. He later pleaded guilty but insane to the additional murder committed in Ohio, receiving another life sentence. Modus operandi. Dahmer's modus operandi included drugging, strangling, or asphyxiating his victims before engaging in acts of necrophilia and dismembering their bodies. He retained some body parts and even attempted to create living zombies by injecting acid into the brains of his still-living victims. Capture and imprisonment. Dahmer was captured in July 1991, and his apartment revealed evidence of his gruesome crimes. While in prison, Dahmer was attacked and killed by a fellow inmate, Christopher Scarver, in 1994. Psychological evaluation. Dahmer underwent psychiatric evaluations, and experts diagnosed him with various disorders, including borderline personality disorder and psychotic disorder. Legacy. Jeffrey Dahmer's case shocked the public due to the brutality and depravity of his crimes. 2. His life and crimes have been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films, including Dahmer, 2002, and My Friend Dahmer, 2017. Jeffrey Dahmer's case remains one of the most infamous examples of serial murder in the United States. The gruesome nature of his crimes and the psychological aspects of his personality continue to be subjects of interest and study in criminology and psychology. Harold Shipman. Harold Shipman, also known as Dr. Death, is believed to have killed an estimated 250 patients. This doctor practiced in Greater Manchester, England, and between 1972 and 1998 he worked in 2 different offices, killing all the while. He wasn't caught until a red flag was raised by several people, including an undertaker who was surprised by the sheer number of cremation certificates Shipman was a part of, along with the fact that most of the cases were elderly women found to have died in bed not at night but rather during the day. Police mishandled the investigation, and Shipman kept killing until he got greedy and tried to concoct a will for a victim that named him beneficiary, which led the victim's daughter to become suspicious. He was finally convicted in 2000 and committed suicide while in prison in 2004. John Wayne Gacy. A construction worker known by his suburban neighbors as outgoing, John Wayne Gacy was involved in politics and even acted as a clown for birthday parties. He was no clown. Gacy came under suspicion in 1978 when a 15-year-old boy, last seen with him, went missing. That wasn't the only time families of missing boys had pointed fingers at Gacy, but it was the first time authorities took them seriously. Soon after, a search warrant granted police access to the Gacy home, with the smell of nearly 30 bodies buried in a 4-foot crawl space under his home. He was convicted of 33 counts of murder, with additional counts of rape and torture, and was executed by lethal injection in 1994. H. Holmes. Chicago has had its share of killers, but perhaps none more haunting than H. Holmes, the pharmacist who turned a hotel into a torture castle. Ahead of the 1893 World's Fair, Holmes moved to Chicago and started outfitting a 3-story hotel with all manner of nefarious contraptions, including gas lines, secret passages and trapdoors, hallways to dead ends, chutes to the basement, soundproofed padding, and torture devices strewn throughout a maze. The gas allowed Holmes to knock out his guests before the worst of what was to happen came next, often on his surgical tables. He then burned the bodies in the building's furnace, selling skeletons to medical schools and running life insurance scams. In all, he copped to more than 30 murders, found only after a fellow scammer turned him in for falling short on a financial agreement, before he was hanged in 1896. Pedro Lopez. One of the world's most prolific serial killers might still be out there. Pedro Lopez is linked to more than 300 murders in his native Colombia and in Ecuador and Peru. At least 1/3 of those murders were tribal women. After Lopez's arrest in 1980, police found the graves of more than 50 of his preteen victims. He was later convicted of murdering 110 girls in Ecuador and confessed to 240 more murders in Colombia and Peru. The monster of the Andes didn't even spend 20 years in prison, as he was released in 1998 for good behavior. More than 20 years since, his whereabouts remain unknown. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy loved the attention his murders garnered him, and many in the United States were more than happy to give him that attention. The western U.S. was his hunting ground, with an unknown number of murders piling up, mostly college-age women, from Washington and Oregon all the way to Utah and Colorado. Bundy was once arrested in Colorado and convicted of kidnapping, but he escaped custody, moving to Florida where he killed multiple times more. He was eventually executed in an electric chair in 1989. Ted Bundy was an American serial killer, kidnapper, and rapist who terrorized several states in the 1970s. Bundy was known for his charm and good looks, which he used to gain the trust of his victims. Here are key details about Ted Bundy. Background. Birth: November 24, 1946. Death: January 24, 1989. Executed in the electric chair. Crimes. Bundy confessed to 30 murders committed between 1974 and 1978, although the actual number is believed to be higher. His victims were young women, often college students, and he was known for approaching them with a cast or other props, feigning injury to gain their sympathy and assistance. Modus operandi. Bundy would often overpower his victims, sometimes returning to the crime scenes to commit further acts of necrophilia. He was known for using various tactics to gain the trust of his victims, including pretending to be injured, posing as an authority figure, or feigning the need for assistance. Capture and escapes. Bundy managed to escape from custody twice. The first escape occurred in 1977 when he jumped out of a courthouse window during a hearing. After his first escape, Bundy committed more murders before being recaptured in Florida in 1978. His second escape was from a Colorado prison in 1979, but he was recaptured a week later. Trial and conviction. Bundy's trial in 1979 was highly publicized. He chose to act as his own attorney, which allowed him certain privileges in the courtroom. He was found guilty of multiple counts of murder and sentenced to death. Execution. Bundy spent years on death row while appealing his sentence. Despite his attempts to delay his execution, he was ultimately executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison on January 24, 1989. Legacy. Ted Bundy's case remains one of the most infamous in American criminal history. His ability to appear normal and charming, despite his violent tendencies, has contributed to the fascination with his story. Bundy's life and crimes have been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and films, including The Deliberate Stranger, 1986, and Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, 2019. Ted Bundy's crimes and the media attention surrounding his case have left a lasting impact on discussions about criminal profiling, the criminal justice system, and the public's perception of serial killers. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.